Welcome back to Simon Says. I'm Scott Simon, and this is a special episode. We return to talking about travel, and Steve Oslica joins us. And what makes this special is we're recording this while he's on a trip, and it's a trip to a faraway land. And this episode is going to be a trip to Germany and Hungary. Steve, I got to ask you this question. Did you plan this trip at this time just to get away from the U.S. elections?
That's a good question. Thanks for having me on. We planned this trip many months ago, and we just completed a Danube cruise. So we started out in Munich and worked our way through down the Danube and Austria and into the Slovak Republic, through Vienna, and then down here to Budapest. So we just wrapped it up. We planned it for a long time. We voted absentee and got the heck out of the country before the election day. So all is well. Okay, so the first question I'm going to ask you is, following news from the United States when you're on a trip like to Germany and Hungary, how hard is it, or how easy is it? I imagine it's probably a little easier today, since most of us have smartphone devices. It's easy to follow, as long as you have the Wi-Fi available. I noticed it was not. Maybe it's because it's a midterm election, and people don't follow it as readily or as intensely as they might when they're in a presidential election. But I didn't get a lot of questions about it over here. Naturally, the people that were traveling with us, we discussed it, a good bit and almost every morning over coffee. But in terms of the Europeans, there didn't seem to be a lot of interest among either our hosts on. Okay. Well, let's talk about Germany. Let's talk about either from our hosts on the ship or from anyone else we dealt with. Sorry about that. Okay, no problem. Let's talk about Germany. A lot of people that will be listening have thought about traveling to Germany. There's a lot of culturally great things to do there, a lot of fun things to do there. What should someone be looking at for a trip to Germany? First, tell us where you went, what city, why, and you say you're on a pilgrimage, and tell us the highlights about going there. Well, we started in Munich, and for anyone that really enjoys great scenery, the Bavarian part of Germany is top of the line. It connects very quickly within a couple hours to Salzburg, Austria, which is an absolutely gorgeous city, the home city of Mozart, and also where all the Sound of Music stuff took place. So that whole region of Europe is gorgeous. The people are friendly. Not to say that they're not friendly in northern Germany. It's just another benefit of traveling in that region, and the food is out of sight. I mean, we made it a point to make sure that we did a lot of walking to get as many steps as possible during the day, because the food is not it's not Jenny Craig, I can tell you that. we were overindulgence is very easy to accomplish if you're not careful. Accommodations for someone who has not been there, starting in Munich. What should someone be looking to do? Any Europe, if you're not a hotel, a person with hotel status, like a Hilton member or Marriott member, etc., and you can use points and stay in a relatively nice place. There are lots of boutique hotels in these European cities that you can find on hotels.com or Travelocity, and the prices are easily acceptable. I mean, you don't have to spend for example $350 a night to stay in the downtown Hilton in Paris or more. By the way, I mean there's There are lots of smaller hotels that, if you're going to only be there for a night or two, the square footage is not what we're used to in North America, but you can bear it for a couple nights before you move on.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this question. This is something that often comes up about electrical appliances. Do we still need converters for electrical when we travel to Germany?
Yeah, my wife Anna and I travel with two at all times, and I have converters that'll work pretty much everywhere. You have to have those. You can buy those like international converters pretty much everywhere at the airports, at any international terminal. You can find them, and they're great because that's one big worry that you can leave at home if you've got those, and they work for a long time. So and the price is right. I mean, I think they're less than $10 most places.
Okay, so now someone's going to Munich. I'm going to Munich. In the top three, what are the top three sites that I should visit, and why?
Well, I mean, if you're any kind of a historian, it's a great city to visit because the city hall, which is called the Rathaus, is in the Marienplatz, which is the very old center of the city, and near that area are all kinds of shops and restaurants and so forth, and the famous Hofbrauhaus, the original Hofbrauhaus that was built in the 16th century, is there, and like a lot of places, it's a bit touristy, but the beer is good and the food is above average, and there's a lot of hotels around there, and there are a lot of boutique hotels around there, so it doesn't cost an arm and a leg to stay not that far away, and then the there's the Glockenspiel is there, and in the wintertime, particularly around Christmas, it's really a great time to be there. While it's cold, it's decorated so nicely that it's almost a can't miss. Both Munich and Vienna are that way during the Christmas season. Again, back to the history thing, it's about an hour or so out to the Dachau concentration camp, and if you are a World War II buff in any way, that's a must see. You just can't. I mean, we went out there a few years ago, just the two of us, thinking that we'd be there for about an hour and a half, and I think it took us about 3.5 hours to get through the place and get back to our hotel. It's a stunning, compelling personal experience.
And reminds us of what we as human beings need not to do, as Germany did in World War II. And you talked about travel. How does one travel when they get to Munich? It's not like in the United States we land, we go to Avis or Enterprise, rent a car, and drive around.
Right. I've done both, travel by train, both locally and between cities. The train system in Germany is really good, both in the cities where, you have the underground system and the above ground trains. The bus systems are very good. When we arrived on October 30th in the morning, we just hopped on a train and went downtown to the main train station, and our hotel was a short walk from there. I mean, we got off the plane, and I think within an hour and a half we were there. So that's pretty easy. You just have to do your homework ahead of time. I think I mentioned that in our previous discussion that
Yes.
Do your homework ahead of time, and you know where to go, where to get on the train, where to buy your tickets, etc. And it's relatively easy. I have rented a car, before. As you know, I traveled in Europe on business, so sometimes you just can't avoid it. So I have rented a car, particularly if I'm moving quickly from country to country. But if you're leisure traveling, my advice is always, use the trains because they accommodate the luggage, and they're usually, the joke about Germany is that the trains always run on time, And by golly, I'll tell you, most of the time that's true. I've only had one experience where it did not, and that was because of a major snowstorm over there in Austria. So,
Hey, now you're driving. Now, is the steering wheel on the left or the right, and what side of the road do you drive on?
oh, it's on the right-hand side, and usually, with the exception of Japan, the only countries where it's on the left-hand side are former or current British Commonwealths. Like Australia, for example. But all over mainland Europe, it's on the right. You're driving on the right side, and your steering wheel's on the left side, just like us.
Do they have Uber and Lyft there?
I haven't checked on Lyft. I have used Uber in Europe, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if they have Lyft as well.
Okay, so you can get around Munich and in fine fashion. Steve Oslica will be back in just a moment. We're going to talk about the other parts of his trip, and we'll be back with more with travel tips to Germany and Hungary in just a moment. I have personal experience myself with DoTerra Essential Oils. Last year I was stricken with a heart attack, ended up in a hospital for a month and a half. And when I came out of a coma, I was groggy, I wasn't alert, and Jay Kersting brought by a vial of wild orange essential oil from DoTerra. And day by day, I could see that I was becoming more alert. And it really did work. And it worked for Jay. That's how he got to be a DoTerra Essential Oils consultant. Here's his story about what DoTerra Essential Oils did for him.
I got involved because I was having a real issue, and this may surprise some. I spent a number of years in broadcasting, and I was under so much stress that I was unable to speak almost nonstop. That was me. I couldn't get a thought out. My wife reached out to a friend of ours and said, Stephanie, maybe you've got something. Let's try it. She presented us with this essential oil called Balance. And all this one I did was I rubbed it on my hands and I inhaled it. So I would just put my hands over my nose and I would inhale it. And within a couple of days, I was back to speaking normally again.
So we're coming up on the holiday season. If you're looking for a great gift idea for someone, contact Jay and Kathy Kersting for DoTerra Essential Oils. You can go to their website, jaykersting.com, and there's a link there to their DoTerra products. There's many of them to choose from. Take your time and get something for yourself. After all, if you're happy, everyone else is happy. We're back with Steve Oslica on Simon Says, talking about travel tips to Germany and Hungary. After Munich, it's a trip down a river. Steve, why don't you describe for us this trip? Is this kind of a river trip? It's a river trip that's not like a riverboat trip down the Mississippi, right?
No, the Danube cruises, the boats look like big barges that had hotels built on top of them, So it's pretty interesting. Our trip started with a bus trip down to Salzburg, and then we visited some other points of interest along the way before we actually boarded the boat and headed down the river. So we did spend some time in Salzburg, which is like I said, it's a great little city, and with lots of stuff to see. And now this was my third trip to Salzburg, and every time I find something new to enjoy there. And then back on the boat, and off we headed. We stopped at the old Benedictine Abbey, which is in the Austrian town of Melk, it's on a big hill which overlooks on one side the Danube River and on the other side the Austrian Autobahn. So I had been there approaching it from the river this time, but also from the Autobahn the last time I was there, which was with my brother after we had gone to the Oktoberfest in Munich. So So anyhow, that's a magnificent abbey with just a chapel that is like nothing else you'd ever see, except perhaps the St. Louis Cathedral, which we're both pretty biased about, I think.
Yeah.
But it's a magnificent old abbey and very active. And then from there it was off to Vienna, which is another great city. It's like a smaller version of Paris, but and very English friendly. So you can tour Vienna. You can stop in a pub, you can stop in a restaurant and have lunch or dinner, and not worry about any language barriers. And the city is it's a very clean city. And again, as I mentioned before, that during the holidays particularly, it's really something special to be in the old town of Vienna. We're going to miss it this time, but we were over here for a different reason. So
okay, how long is this? Was this river trip in terms of miles and time?
I don't know about miles, but we started in Munich and finished in Budapest just this morning. And the overall trip is about 10 days, and I think we were on the ship for 7 nights. So we had 2 nights in hotels, and then the rest of the time you're basically on the ship. The ship docks at different places. You get off for a while, and you tour the sites or the city, and then you come back aboard, and sometimes the ship will sail while you're eating dinner, and sometimes it'll sail during the night. You don't know. They'll tell you when, but but you can tell when they fire up the engines, that you're on your way.
Okay. Now you're in Budapest, Hungary as we speak. Tell us about a trip for any of us going there. I mean, I don't think Budapest and Hungary are top of mind destinations for a lot of us. Tell us why we should travel to Budapest.
Well, I found out that we got here yesterday. It's also multilingual city. In fact, more so than a lot of places. I noticed the menus were loaded with 5, 6, 7 different language options to look at for each item, which is very nice. The Hungarian language is something that even most other Slavic people don't speak. So it's difficult, I think, for a foreigner to get through this country, particularly if they don't speak the language. So I think the locals have become pretty helpful in that regard. The history here is unbelievable. I mean, we took a boat tour last night down the Danube here in Budapest, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen. I didn't expect it. They told us on the ship that touring down the river at night was like a bucket list item that you'd never put on your bucket list, and it did not disappoint. So we found it to be outstanding. The city here is just full of history and lots of Catholic culture, because like a lot of Central Europe, it's a very Catholic country, and so we got to see a number of memorial sites today, for the heroes of their various wars and challenges over the years, and then a number of churches and cathedrals and so forth along the way. I had never been here, been all over Europe, never been to Hungary, and for me, it's been a real treat. We're gonna stay a couple extra days here before we head back to the States on Monday.
That's interesting. You've not been to Budapest, Hungary. I thought you'd been to every city in the world.
That's almost impossible to achieve, Scott. But strangely enough, I have relatives that live about 2 hours from here, and they're coming to see us tomorrow and spend the weekend here and party a little bit and get reacquainted. They were in St. Louis over the summer visiting us as well. So this will be kind of a fun reunion, they know the town, so we're going to rely on them to take us around, and I expect I'll pick up a check or two along the way as well.
Well, that segs into my next question, money, conversion of money. Let's start with the conversion of money in Germany and then the conversion of money in Hungary. And you're a money man. Tell us, what should we know when we travel to Germany about converting our currency?
Well, the best thing to do is not bring a lot of cash, because the ATMs are great. The most of Europe, of course, is on the euro, with a few exceptions. In Hungary is one of them. So they don't use the euro. However, they will take euros in cash after they convert from the local currency. We noticed that today at one of the restaurants where we had lunch. The best advice for traveling over here is to don't convert cash, use the ATMs, and make sure that you talk to your financial institution to let them know that you're going to be traveling to those countries, because otherwise, if they see a transaction, from someplace that you do not normally travel to, a red flag goes up, and they'll put a stop on your card. So prior to traveling, I always make sure that I note with the cards that I use with the companies that this is the list of companies or countries that I'm traveling to, and they note that in my records. So that way, if I go to an ATM and I want to get 100 or 200 euros, it's no problem.
That's a good tip, because you never ever want to be stranded out of country and your ATM card doesn't work. We've talked about converting money. We've talked about how to get around. We've talked about some of the sites. Now let's talk a little bit about the planning. Now I know this is a special type of trip for you, but because you were in business, you made these trips before. How long does it take to plan a trip like this if somebody were to be away from the United States in Germany and Hungary for 7, 10, 14 days?
Well, I'll tell you, the hardest part of it was making sure we had somebody to watch our 2 golden retrievers while we were gone. Everything else is pretty much set up for you. All you have to do is show up, including handling your baggage. So, for me, it's much easier usually for me to travel by myself, because I've got a roller bag and I have my own system, and I'm pretty automatic. When you're traveling with 2 people, it's different, and I think I touched on that a little bit, in the last podcast we talked about. And so, you're carrying more stuff, and kind of slows you down a little bit, and that's fine, because you're on vacation, so it shouldn't matter, and it doesn't. But these, we have never done. To mine, I can't remember a time in our marriage we've had one of these prearranged tours like this, and I mean, you can't beat it in terms of service. And one of the big things is you don't have to lug your luggage around. I mean, we checked into the room here, and our luggage is going to be brought up to us. Normally that's not the case. You're lugging it up here yourself. So anyhow, that's the nice thing about that. I mean, other than that, it's just getting the time off, scheduling it ahead of time, and then having somebody watch your house. And fortunately, our 2 kids are in St. Louis, so they've been alternating staying at the house and keeping an eye on our 4-legged friends. So you recommend that if we're to travel there, not to try to plan it ourselves, is to get a professional to do it for us, right? Well, if you want to take a cruise, those things are, it's the same as when you do a Caribbean cruise, right? So everything is pretty much preset, and all you have to do is make sure you show up, and make sure you always keep your passport with you, because sometimes you duck in and out of these countries, and usually if it's in the EU, they're not stopping anyone at the border, but once in a while they do, like a little random check or something. And if you have your passport with you, it's a lot easier. So, but yeah, I mean, this has been really low stress. compared to if it was just the two of us trying to make our way through Europe.
Wow.
So.
Okay, great. Last question. What do the folks there think of us Americans? After all, when we travel there, we're guests in their country.
Well, I'll tell you, that's a complicated question. It depends on the behavior of the people involved. So there were 120 people in our group. I would say out of that 120, there were probably 10 that would be the stereotypical, what traditionally people have referred to as the ugly American tourists. The rest of the people were, very accommodating, very friendly with the locals, and you can tell they really appreciate it. The same is true on the other side. I had a couple of incidents. There was a street musician that made some comment about our politics, and I won't go into the detail of what he said, but we just ignored it and moved on. And but overall, it's kind of the same thing on the other side. We could spend a whole podcast, going on about,
right.
American tourists, especially the people that have never traveled before. For example, if you know somebody doesn't necessarily speak your language well, speaking English to them, 2 decibels above your normal way of delivering your question is not going to help. In fact, it might even, kind of torque them off. Mm-hmm. The best method I found over the years traveling over here, particularly areas where they don't speak English as well as they do, like in the Netherlands or Belgium or Munich or Vienna or Berlin, is to just simply ask, may I speak English? And that's a real icebreaker.
Great.
And usually you get more than you ask for in terms of, return of answered question and service. That's
a great tip that you gave about don't raise the volume of your voice. We teach that where I work on the telephone. You don't raise your voice, even when the other person says they say, I can't hear you clearly. Don't raise your voice, slow down, speak more deliberately, and it works better that way. Well, I said that was going to be the last question. One last question, I thought. Safety and security. What's it like there?
We didn't notice any particular problems. On the. I mean, my experience is that if you follow the rules of the road, for lack of a better expression, you're going to be fine. When you're on a ship like this, there's a security staff, and so you sleep well at night. The biggest problem for us was we were having such a good time with the friends we met on the ship that we didn't sleep enough. But I mean, other than that, I mean, I think safety and security are pretty solid here. There's going to be the random incident like there is, other places in the world, and that's just part of the risk you run when you when you go out of your house, or you get in your car, or you get on an airplane or a train or whatever. I mean, there are some people that are just not good people, and it's hard for us to avoid that at some point in our lives.
Well, the one thing that amazes me, not about just again your travels, you travel to so many different places with great stories, but that with today's technology, I mean, the audio clarity is not like it was 15, 20 years ago. The audio clarity sounds great, and I guess we'll just start talking a little later about maybe your next overseas trip. I'm sure people are going to really enjoy this, especially your comments about Munich, because it's a destination that many Americans like to visit. And thank you for joining us. This is going to continue to be a popular topic with our listeners, as Simon says.
Well, I appreciate it, Scott. It's always fun to discuss travel, and as a bit of an amateur historian, I try to take in every bit of local history that I can get my hands on. So at some point, maybe we can get into that. But the Munich thing is great. I mean, it's a great city. There's lots to do there, and all these old European cities, they have the old flavor, the younger flavor, and then the history to go with it. In the last century, there were tens of millions of people lost their lives in the cause of protecting Europe, and there are testaments to that all over the continent. And as a historian, I hope that none of that is lost.
That's Steve Oslica talking to us from Germany and Hungary. Actually, he's in Hungary as he speaks with us, but he was in Munich, Germany. And our next travel tip will come from Jay Kersting. We'll talk about your travels to Las Vegas with some tips that you won't get anywhere else. And particular news about Jay being our travel tip expert along with Steve. Jay just took a job recently with an airline, so he's really going to have some expert tips for you on how to travel, especially to Las Vegas. My name's Scott Simon. This is Simon Says. Our travel episodes, thank you for listening. They've been very popular in the past. We will continue them in the future. And if you would, share this with your friends on your social media and subscribe at simonsaystories.com. Until then, for Steve Oslica in Budapest, Hungary, I'm Scott Simon in Las Vegas, Nevada.